Welcome to the Salience podcast, where we identify what stands out from all the noise.
In this episode, we will be discussing what it means to facilitate strategic dialogue to work on intractable problems. With me today is practitioner of strategic dialogic methods, Marco Valente. Marco is currently a consultant and member of the executive team at Cultivating Leadership. In this role, he is working primarily as a coach with both individuals and teams, and as a facilitator of executive teams to help them make meaning of their most pressing challenges. He uses a complexity-informed lens to tackle these challenges more effectively and to create better team cohesion and social capital. He has also worked on multi-stakeholder dialogues with a diverse range of partners, from municipality planners across Europe to LGBTI communities worldwide to nanotechnology scientists at Harvard and more. He describes his work as providing teams with formats to improve their capacity to make sense and skillfully act on complex challenges. His work is informed by complexity theories, a decade of experience in facilitation, and over 5 years as a university lecturer in leading for sustainability. He also writes a very thought-provoking blog series that he shares through his LinkedIn page, and I have been following that for a few years now. Some of the topics he has written on recently, I would love to discuss with him on our chat today, such as his work on discussing the differences and overlaps between systems thinking and complexity, as well as the ways different theories describe the differences between complex and complicated systems. Welcome, Marco, to the Salience podcast.
Thank you so much, Jen. It is a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for the warm introduction.
It's fantastic. I feel like I've been waiting to interview you for a while now, so I'm really excited that we're finally making it happen. So, Marco, I'm going to start off with something about you. You describe yourself as bilingual in your academic background. You've studied and immersed yourself in very different fields, from semiotics and social science, and then later on to sustainability science. Could you please tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and what influenced and shaped the trajectory of your pursuits?
Well, thank you. That's a great question. So I think like most people, when you talk to them after some 20 years of studies or career, they kind of present a coherent-ish picture of what they're doing today as informed by what they've studied before. And I'm sure you have your own background that led you to complexity and sense-making and all of that. So personally, I started with social sciences because I wanted to study society for the sake of making society better. And that led me to methods for social science, journalism, semiotics. When I was 20, I wanted to be a journalist or an investigative journalist, and then use statistics to find out what are the big picture trends of society. So to get to know society kind of objectively, and I use quotation marks here for people who are not watching the video, objectively, which is a strong kind of word. And later I got interested in corporate responsibility and sustainability as other ways to make society better. But that left me always wanting in terms of, okay, but how do we know if we're actually making progress towards sustainability in the big picture of things? Because you can have some small initiatives, which are, they seem to be working well, but then they go counter some bigger overarching goals. And that got my mind spinning with systems thinking. So I studied in Sweden some 17 years ago now. Gee, I feel old. I am old. And that led me to study in Sweden this master's in leadership for sustainability, where they use the systems thinking approach, like a holistic picture approach to sustainability science. And what does it look like to make progress towards sustainability from a first principles grounded approach in systems thinking? At the time, it was mostly Meadows, Dana Meadows, systems dynamics. And I know that many people who are interested in complexity probably 10 years ago were interested in systems thinking. So that led me there. And I taught for 5 years after I studied myself as a student. And there was a leadership component in the master's program that I didn't sign up for. I was like, whatever, I'll just come to study the science. And if I really have to bear with the leadership part, then so be it. And later on, I found it quite transformative and I really loved it. So that kind of got me introduced to a lot of personal development and essentially development of my leadership qualities and skills, which I didn't know they were so important. Later on, staying as a teacher for 5.5 years, that become more familiar with the concepts, both on the science side and on the leadership side. And I left academia after 5 years because I didn't want to pursue a PhD. I was more passionate about teaching than doing research in that particular setting. So I started doing solo consulting as a facilitator. I traveled the world for a year. I started with my work as a facilitator, and then I joined a collective of friends and consultants, Cultivating Leadership, which matched really well my interests, present and future. And then I found myself then doing this work that is complexity informed, much on the personal development side, how humans can evolve with bigger minds in the face of some of the complex challenges that we have, such as sustainability challenges or other type of challenges, which can be corporate or could be just navigating uncertainty that is pervasive around us. And so that's how I find myself today in a work that I didn't know 20 years ago I would end up doing, but it somehow feels coherent in terms of the intellectual background and the intellectual history and the experiences that brought me here.
Amazing. I actually, as I was listening to you speak, I hear a lot of parallels in our experiences because I study anthropology. Had no idea what I was going to do when I graduated from school. I was also in academia, and I left because I didn't want to do a PhD. And I stumbled into the work. Yeah, I stumbled very much into the work that I do now, and just serendipitously found such a good fit with it. So many, many parallels there. I'd love to explore some of those a bit further. And I feel like sustainability, right? Like, what other bigger, more complex challenge could there be? And so I want to sort of pick up on that because you've now spoken about, like entering this leadership and personal development space actually through the door of sustainability, whereas a lot of times people sort of enter it the other way. So you also write a lot about complexity and the challenges that humanity is facing because they have all these very entangled, complex problems it has to manage now. You work with a lot of leaders. Now, I just want to paint a hypothetical senior leader. It might be someone you've coached or a combination of people you've coached, right? If somebody is really stuck, really deeply entangled in the complexity of his or her context, but maybe this person has never had any exposure to some of the complexity science or methods, right? What are some tools or tips that you personally use to help this type of leader to come to a deeper understanding?
So I was reflecting on this notion of like the way in. How do we find our foot in the door? So first, I want to also circle back on specifically sustainability challenges, if you want, but let's pin that for later. It feels to me like in the last 4 or 5 years since COVID, it's become easy to talk about the necessity for looking at the world from a complexity-informed lens because people have admitted not knowing. So it feels to us today, the consulting work that we do, it feels like, admitting that the world is complex, messy, interconnected, deeply entangled, unpredictable is kind of the easy part. Everybody admits now, we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. There are too many variables involved. Things are fast moving. There's this beautiful metaphor that I read it first in Epstein's book, Range. It's like Martian tennis. So we're playing tennis while the field is moving. Somebody's moving the net up and down. My racket is nowhere to be found. So it's like this very moving kind of picture, which kind of gives the feeling not just of complexity, but like high levels of, I don't know what on earth is going on. So it's kind of easy to tell them, like, as a way in, you are embedded in very complex challenges. But then the next question becomes, okay, but what do you do with it? Then what do you need that we can offer as coaches, consultants, your friends at work? What kind of conversations you can have differently? And what kind of lenses you want to try on as different ways of looking at the world, and how to be differently and what to do differently. That's the more juicy question. Like, it feels like the complexity is kind of assumed as a background for now. I don't know what's your experience with it now, but it's become easier and easier to at least justify the need for doing things anew.
I so much agree with you. I always joke with a lot of clients that I meet now, partners that I'm speaking with now, that when I started working in this space of complexity and been in this space for close to 20 years now, I remember before COVID having to convince people that complexity existed, and that it wasn't just because we were hand waving and didn't have the answers. Now, yes, absolutely agree with you that people definitely accept it as background truth. Although there are some who are still unaware of complexity, even though they can very, very accurately describe the symptoms of complexity, right? And I think that most of these, whether it's a leader in an organization or just somebody trying to lead their own way through a difficult situation, right? Everyone is sort of struggling with, how do I know what the right thing to do is? And how do I actually have that, whether it's courage or whether it's some kind of confidence to take that next step, right? What are some things that I would love to hear, because we work in a similar space, like what has worked for you to help people build that confidence?
So that's a great question, because how do I know what's the right thing to do? This is something that has amused me in the past and in the present. So let's take a step back. So it feels to me like there is a lot that we can say more if we want to pin this conversation for later about how complexity challenges our minds in terms of one of my friends and mentors and colleagues, Jennifer, talks about mind traps. So we can get trapped into simple habits of mind in believing that complexity doesn't exist. So we can try to simplify our stories so that we can have an easier, kind of more coherent way of making sense. They're tempting, these traps of mind, but they're wrong. But they're still tempting. So, we easily fall into them. And so to me, one of the easy responses would be to believe that complexity can be wished away, and people that can wish that, they have the right answer, that complexity doesn't exist, or they build a simple story out of very little data. And one of the traps of mind that people can be lured into is to believe that there is a best solution, or like what is the right thing to do, or what is the best thing to do. Sometimes I notice in my coaching or in my trainings as well, like I teach facilitation also to some of our clients. And I was noticing some weeks ago, people were asking me, what is the best thing to do? Like, what is the best approach for this scenario? I'm like, a part of me just wanted to say, like, if you believe that there is a best in complexity, and I don't know the context that you will be working in months from now, like, I don't think best even exists in the vocabulary of complex interventions. So there is a temptation to go for best or the right thing to do. And I guess what I find most helpful is to think of it in terms of evolutionary terms, like something is good enough for now to survive or to pass the genes to the next generation, or it's fit for context in the moment, and the context will change in a moment, right? But for now, it seems apt and the right thing to do, and is a sensible next step given the circumstances. But going back to your question about when people feel challenged by complexity, how do they find the courage? I think it's possible to find both the courage to do something in the face of uncertainty, admitting that we don't have all the answers, and at the same time having that polarity, that tension between confidence, this is what we know and this is what we're trying to do given I don't know, a vision that we have or what we want to protect. And at the same time, we don't know the outcome of this. And I think it's possible. I think it's possible to manage that and still look really competent and a great leader in the eyes of your colleagues, because you can still have, setting directions, boundaries, helping your team feel safe in the face of uncertainty, experimentation, portfolio approaches, and whatnot. So there is still a lot of things that you can do skillfully and competently, while at the same time not falling into the illusion of, hey guys, I have the right answer, believe me. Because if you check what they do after a bit of time, you will notice that they will be wrong half of the time. So what's the point of looking confident if actually that's not true? Yeah.
I love that. I love what you said. That it's not about looking confident in the sense of having the answer and knowing it, but it's confidently going in knowing that you don't know and you just have to manage as you go along. It's a very different quality of confidence that we're requiring from our leaders these days. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah.
I love the way Jennifer does it. So Jennifer Garvey-Berger is a friend and mentor and my boss, kind of. She's the founder of Cultivating Leadership. I love the way she communicates this with the whole company. She would, send out messages to everybody, or she would write newsletters and books and stuff like that. And she always embodies both the confidence of, this is our mission, this is our vision, this is what we stand for, this is a move that we make in the face of an uncertain future. And at the same time, it's fine to say, we don't know what will happen from it, but we will monitor what happens from this experiment. And we'll be rigorous in checking what happens when we take that move. And I think a lot of it has to do with skillful communication to the people who surround you, because I think you can embody both. I think it's possible.
Wow. So I noted down a couple of things as you were speaking. The first one I wanted to really go back to is I love that you mentioned, that in evolution, right? It's very interesting for me because people are recognizing now that, a more organic metaphor like evolution is probably better suited for human systems as opposed to, highly mechanical ones where, we need to push this button and pull this lever and, these are the drivers, right? We recognize that behavior is a little too inorganic for human systems. And you mentioned that this is something that really stood out to me, right? That evolution actually works with what's best and easiest available at that time, not necessarily with what's optimal. So there's this wonderful, since we're on the topic of tensions and polarities, I think for me, some of the challenges I've seen leaders experience is that, yes, there is on one level, this intuition that I know I cannot engineer to an end outcome. I need to work with the conditions that I have in front of me. And I want to do that. I want to do both. I want to be able to be responsive and adaptive and respond. But I also, might be a vision that has been promised to shareholders or to board members. And, this is the type of outcome that I need to be able to demonstrate. So it's this tension that knowledge of uncertainty also creates. I would love to understand, from your experience, how you might have had some experience in your work. And you mentioned, this is the second point I picked up, the need to have skillful communication. Now, I think that's a skill that everyone could use. I would love to get some of that as well. Do you have any wonderful examples that you might share of how skillful communication and managing this tension might have been done gracefully?
So you're too kind. I don't know if I have wonderful examples, but I may have some thoughts to share. So I want to go back to this notion of visioning. But because that's something that I've actually been thinking about a lot. It seems that there are different camps when it comes to visioning, and people do different scenario planning and visioning and backcasting from an ideal scenario and the future, planning backwards in engineering and all those kind of approaches. It feels like to me, and this is kind of putting together a lot of ideas, and I hope to give credit to, I hope to represent ideas faithfully, but essentially it feels like people wonder about how can I design the future that I want and create conditions for that future that I want to come into fruition. So for example, here's something that I want to do in 10 years from now, and then I plan backwards, and then I take all the steps and I do all the actions in place so that I can go towards that vision. So, planning backwards from that vision that I want. And people have done that with systems dynamics and systems thinking. And then there are other approaches which are more emergent, for example. I think it's a combination of both, and I think it's highly contextual. My sense, after quite a bit of reflecting on this and also looking at these different schools of thought, is that it really depends, because everything comes back to context. It really depends on the context in which you're in. And my sense would be, how much power do you have in influencing the variables that you have within reach? And by power, I mean, do you have resources? Do you have money? Do you have control over some resources? Do you have strong incentives to the coworkers? Do you have how much power do you have to influence those resources around you? And how contained is that environment in which you can make a vision happen? Meaning, if you're on a production line or you're an engineer and you have a deadline of 5 years from now, you have to build this product. Even if something gets in the way in terms of, big trends in the world out there, you can still keep your own vision within a laboratory-ish kind of environment. You can still do, I don't know, we need to launch this product in 5 years from now. We get the resources, we get the best employees, we get the best minds, we get all the technical expertise, we make it happen. When something that is so powerful, as in a trend out there that is so powerful that it can even enter the laboratory or the production line, comes and sweeps everything off, like COVID, for example, then goes away your, vision of even products that you want to launch, for example, or restaurants that you wanted to open, because now nobody goes at restaurant. It's 2020, and people don't. So I think it would be interesting to kind of square the circle and find a way to square personal vision, the variables that you have at hand and the variables that you have in play, and how much power you have to control those, and the backwards engineering. somehow matching that with an appreciation of how the external variables can powerfully come in and either create the conditions for some amazing opportunity that you haven't seen before, or can completely throw you off course because of some, I don't know, black swan events, for example. So that's one thing that I'm curious about. But it feels to me that, agency that you have, control over some variables, is kind of a big one to keep in mind when you want to build your vision towards the future. Then the other more emerging approach towards vision could be, this is where we want to go. We have a sense of where we want to go. We acknowledge that there are multiple ways to go at it. We acknowledge that the future in 5 years has many unpredictable elements, including what we don't know that we don't know in terms of technology or other factors to keep in mind. And we want to be, and I hate using this word, I hope there is a better word, but we want to be opportunistic towards whatever comes in our way that can either help us or hinder us. We want to be adaptable. Opportunistic doesn't sound quite right, but you see what I mean? We want to be able to make the most of the environmental kind of variables that come into play in the moment. So that's a long answer only to the first question.
Fantastic answer. I kind of chuckled when you said opportunistic and how you hate the word, because when we think about opportunity, it's a wonderful thing. But somehow, we are, made to feel bad about taking opportunities. So I think there is nothing wrong with being opportunistic. I think it's, in a lot of the work that I do with teams and leaders, I always say that you need to consistently be situationally aware.
Here you have it. It's a better word.
Yeah. Just attuning to the environment, attuning to how the situation is shifting, right? That avails you to opportunities. But it's also being opportunistic. It's also taking action when the opportunity presents itself. And that's the piece I think people, tend to forget, right? It's this, they're stuck in scanning mode a lot of the times.
Yeah. There's a beautiful metaphor that often we use also in our own trainings, which is that difference between travel planning with like a GPS navigator that gives you the exact, pins in every turn of the road that you should take, versus wayfinding, where, the moon is pointing you towards a sense of direction. And you want to be aware in every moment, these are the conditions. I have to find my way and navigate moment by moment by moment. In terms of what are the opportunities that present themselves, what are the risks here? There is a rock, and so on. It still gets you in the same direction. You're still going north in both cases, but there is a predictability about each of the turns that you will take in travel planning that actually you're not doing in wayfinding, but then wayfinding avails you to something else instead.
I love that. I also really liked how you sort of made that distinction, right? Because you mentioned something that I'm huge on agency, because I think that when people are dealing with a lot of uncertainty, there is this tendency to swing from this, engineering, mechanistic control mindset all the way to, so I can't control anything, so I can't do anything about the situation. It's going from one extreme to completely surrendering your agency. I love that you made that distinction, right? That one of the ways people can manage is to understand what is within your agency to manage in terms of variables, and what isn't. And then to within that space of variables, the variables that you have some level to influence and manage, right? You maintain that capability to respond to how the environment shifts. So I love that you make that distinction, because I think that that distinction isn't always clear to people.
I absolutely love that, because I don't want to sound critical. There is people who, in good faith, with an initial understanding of complexity theories, maybe sometimes paint too simple of a picture and saying, it's complex. We just have to throw our hands up. And we really don't believe that. I think there is a lot of agency and a lot of things that we can do. It is a simplified picture if people somehow, some way believe, well, since it's complex, we cannot really predict anything, we cannot do anything. Quite the opposite. We want to empower people to act in the face of complexity, emergence, not knowing. There is still a lot that you can do, and a lot that you can do differently, and a lot of very specific ways of approaches or even mindsets that people can use. And so I absolutely love that. I don't want to, I never want to leave people with the feeling of, oh, but I can't do anything about it, or I just have to let the world happen to me because I can't predict it. And there's quite the opposite, actually. There is a lot that we can do differently, and a lot that we can do skillfully still in the face of complexity, uncertainty, and not knowing.
Absolutely agree with you. I think that there, in several of the interviews that we have had on the Sarians podcast, this topic came up in different ways. And I think one of them is recognizing that in this day and age, we do things as leaders. And this is with the recognition that everyone is a leader, right? Not just formal leaders, but we do things as leaders oftentimes through influence rather than through authority. And in that recognition also grants us a lot of agency, right?
Yeah. People call it soft power. People call it influencing, but it's basically, yes, it's basically the doing something with the powers of persuasion, role modeling. We have a lot of influence in the social sphere that we actually don't know about. There is so much that we don't know yet in terms of even research. Like, how does a group make its own mind about something? How does a team come to a conclusion about something? You as an anthropologist probably know a lot more than this than I do on this, but we don't have a coherent theory about how does a group swing an opinion, or how do people get to model a new culture. So I guess that the best that we can do so far is to believe that there is power in setting an example, doing something without being coercive. We don't exactly know how groups change, how people change their mind, or how people follow a leader, how people follow a role model. But we can do our best in acting with integrity, acting according to our values, acting based on what we believe, be kind and be nice to people. And the rest, we really don't know what will happen and what exactly will change people's hearts and minds. Or maybe you have a unified theory about how people change and you haven't told us. The best kept secret in anthropology.
I wish I did. I think that it is a combination of many factors. We always say that it's technology is a big one, right? Technology, not just in terms of what we think about tech these days, is it being an app or something like that, but technology, like moving from moving from the horse to a cart, and a cart with the horse to a car, right? Those technological changes that everything around us changed. Those are massive environmental pressures. But I think like within in-group changes, right, there is always that inertia, right? Then there are always sort of tensions between the bastions of tradition and the people who want change, right? And I think it's so interesting because in almost every organization or any social group that I work with, you still sense similar tension. It's always a combination of those factors. There is always, but it's a healthy tension. You need people, and it goes back again to the starting point that we had around tensions and polarities. Is without that healthy tension, actually nothing moves. Nothing changes, and nothing changes in a meaningful way. Because if it was all about let's break everything and not think about what can sustain, right, then the society also does not have any longevity.
Mm. And so what I hear you say is that also you find that tension in teams, for example, between the bastions of conservation and status quo, in lack of a better word, I hope I'm not painting a too simplified picture. And at the same time, there is the other one that is the change makers and people who are driving for innovation and change. And there is a healthy tension also because, this is one of the things that I also try to do when I coach and when I facilitate teams, is that I try to help them think not into a simplistic way of people who don't think like me are my enemies, or like, I'm an advocate for change and I want things to change in this team. And then there is this guy who is getting in my way. But I try to look at it from a more of a systemic kind of, no, not a systemic, maybe it's not the best word, but from the lens of what is the system here trying to do or protect? Because if there is somebody who's protecting something, maybe there is a function in the system. It could be outdated, but it could be that today is trying to protect something. For the integrity of the system, somebody is saying, I don't want this change. Maybe that tells us something about, the group of people, the team, the organization came into existence some years ago. And the fact that there are some people who are still holding on to some old ideas, it's there to protect something. So I'm always trying to ask people, what is this thing trying to protect? This thing is here for a reason. Let's try to understand the reason with curiosity first before we go on changing anything, because, there is such a thing as changing too much too soon without understanding what are the systemic forces trying to tell us. And I'm not here to interpret what is the force trying to tell us or what is it trying to protect. The team needs to make meaning, speaking of sense making, the team needs to make meaning of what is that thing trying to do now. And maybe they can come to the conclusion that this thing has been very helpful in the past and is not helping us anymore. So we can let go of it, but at least you have to ask the control question first.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There is this futures and foresight framework called the Three Horizons framework that proposes that at any given time, right, there are always these three horizons of time that are in tension. The first being this future-oriented, visionary, sort of horizon where we're imagining what does our system need to look like to actually evolve into the future. But at the same time, there are the people who sort of play the role as business managers, right? Trying to safeguard something because, hey, if we move too fast, how are we going to keep the lights on, right? So there are those two horizons. And then these two horizons and the tension that it creates is actually what creates space for the third horizon, which is that entrepreneurial horizon for people to experiment and run multiple safe to fail experiments to test ideas, right? See what works, see what doesn't, and with the recognition that we will choose to discard more than we keep, right? But the learnings will always come with us, and at any given time, right? Whether it's any group of people, when we're dealing with change, we're always managing these three horizons actively. So that's something I really found valuable. The framework is from a gentleman called Bill Sharp.
We're running a three horizons now when we think about the future of our company. So we've been 6 months in because it's a process that is taking its due time, and we're actually we're going through the process of thinking about long-term vision, what is here today, and then we're working with the horizon in the middle. So as we speak, this is something that we're in the midst of as well. So totally agree, and I find it very valuable. Zan, if you have energy for this, I want to go back to this notion of polarities, because it seems that we've been talking about polarities a lot without mentioning it. So I hope to give justice to Barry Johnson's idea of polarities, but just in a nutshell, a polarity, I don't know if it's come up in the podcast with a definition as well, but essentially is an apparent paradox, an apparent tension between two seemingly opposing poles, and seemingly is the key word here. They seem opposed, but actually they need to be in dialogue, and they need to be in this constant tension between each other, so the healthy movement between the two can happen. So the polarity can become a polarization when these two seem at odds with each other, or when people get stuck into an either or thinking. It's like it's either this or that, or when people start fighting for their preferred pole. So for example, like, a lot of natural movements between, I don't know, centralization and decentralization, or autonomy of the individual, and then I contribute to a collective identity to the firm that I'm in, or future orientation and task orientation in the present. So it's super important when you frame a polarity to frame both poles in the neutral or positive way. So it's not you're saying, autonomy is good and then centralization is bad, because in that way you're making a straw man kind of simplified picture of the other pole. So it's not a real polarity. You have to present both as neutral or positives, both hypotheses. And then there are multiple frames that you can use and things that you can do to help a team and an individual think about, where is the polarity at in this team, in this moment? Where are we getting stuck? Where are we getting polarized because we're talking past one another? Because people are making a simplified picture of the downsides of your side, which is my least preferred side. So there is a lot of things that we could do, and a lot of things that we do with teams. We help them map the polarity. And one of the things, for example, that we do when we map it would be to see what does it look like to have too much of a good thing. If you do too much of one at the expense of the other, and the key here is at the expense of the other, what would you notice in your system? And then there are ways in which we can map out whether a polarity has become a polarization, because you can actually gauge that by the way people talk to one another. If they make a straw man or a simplified argument of the other side. Another way in which we actually see polarities become polarization is when, and probably we've seen this if we work with any big company over the last 4 or 5 years, if people do a restructuring way too soon, and people say, working from home has been a disaster. Now we have to go with all of our might in the opposite direction. And now it's all about being back at the office. And then you will see mutiny after some point, right? Like if you go with too much force in the opposite direction, as if that were the magic wand that will solve all of your problems, it is likely that you are ignoring the polarity there and the healthy tension between the two, because you are disenfranchising somebody else. In the same way, if you take another swing back, my hope is that companies would do that, even if people have to make these moves, because sometimes you have to make a bold move in one direction or another. But I hope that companies would see them as polarities and not as problems to be solved, because the moment you make a very strong move in one direction, ignoring the other pole altogether, you are likely to create a polarization or a disenfranchisement from somebody. Somebody will get grumpy and disgruntled and frustrated, and you can minimize a bit of that. Some of that is inevitable, but you can minimize a little bit of that with communication, with acknowledging that it's a polarity, with just being more thoughtful about the energy and the tension that is necessary between the two, and not just saying, we're going in this direction now, and that's the solution to all of our problems, present and future, which is likely not to be the case.
No, I love what you described, that swing that you see, right? Like those are some of the patterns to watch for in an organization, or when you're facilitating group dynamics, when there's that shift in the space where you realize, something that was once a healthy generative thing has swung into something that's dividing the group. I really like that. Now I want to actually turn a little bit to some of your recent blog posts, which I love. Thank you for writing them. So deep and informative. One of your recent posts, you described the need for what you call is a philosophical turn, right? So you say that actually people are approaching complex problems as though it's just, okay, there's this new method, there's new vocabulary, right? But what you've described is a philosophical turn, which is much deeper. And I think this points a lot to what we're describing here as well, which is to, embrace the contradictions in the system. Could you share a little bit more about what you mean and how you would describe this philosophical turn?
Well, so thank you for reading my blog post. You're welcome. It's only dozens of hours for every book, so it's fine. This one specifically, if I remember all the things that I mentioned there, which I should, but my parenting brain is a bit like tofu at the moment. This one specifically was about a big picture kind of reflection about what do we need to see differently and not just use the methods, because the risk is that we use the methods and we use a new nomenclature, but we still think and perceive the world in an old way. It seems to me like if you really go deep into complexity, now Gene Bolton has written just this new book, like The Tao of Complexity, which I look forward to reading. There is so much deep stuff about complexity that when you go really deep down into the theories, it really calls for a fundamental shift in the worldview. And this goes back to what we were saying earlier about the leaders that we work with. It is easy to be tempted and to want to look for the right answer. So some of the philosophical kind of new postures and approaches that might be better suited for complexity would be from a world of certainty to a world of uncertainty, where if you really embody a stance where you are in complexity, you're admitting that you are in a complex world, we don't have the right answer, and still we can look competent and confident in our own eyes and in the eyes of others. So from a world of certainty to a world of things are ever evolving, what seemed like the right answer yesterday is not the right answer today. And also from a static world where problems were done and solved once and for all, which may be behind that impulse to do these big moves and these big restructurings or these big kind of interventions that we're looking for a right answer, to a world that is always in becoming. And since it's always in becoming, there is no perfection and there is no idealism, there is no right answer, because perfection doesn't exist in a state that is away from thermodynamic equilibrium. If things are always away from thermodynamic equilibrium, you cannot have perfection, because perfection is a static picture of something in a particular moment in time. And another one is also from a world of objects to a world of relationships, which to me points to the notion of describing something, understanding something by describing its qualities versus understanding something by understanding the relationships. Now, this may sound very abstract, but for example, you do an assessment of a team and you interview every individual and you kind of make, a leadership assessment of everybody as their own person. I don't have anything against that. But then as an anthropologist, you teach me, you get to understand a lot more by people by looking at them in relationship and in context. There is only so much that you can understand by somebody by coaching them, which is great. And I'm a huge fan of coaching people. But there is something missing if you coach people without looking at how they interact and what are the environments in which they're embedded. So I'm not saying that, this philosophical turn is an either or. I'm just saying looking at things in relationship is something that also adds value to your understanding of something. So from a world of inherent qualities, the Aristotelian and kind of Platonic qualities of this is the thing that a zebra is made of, versus the biological kind of ecological approach to here's a zebra in the wild and look at what it does. So from a world of objects, a world of relationships, from a world of nouns, or a world of verbs, I was so struck by this reading. We were studying, I think it was leadership and social change back in the day at this master's in Sweden. We read this piece, maybe you've come across it, but there are some First Nations languages in what is now Northern America that didn't have nouns. So these old languages of these First Nations peoples didn't have nouns. They would only had verbs and adjectives, but they didn't have nouns. So it's like, it's not a horse, but it's galloping. It's like about this thing, like you don't even have a noun for like this thing that is galloping, but it's galloping and it's flowing, air is blowing. Like you don't have nouns. It's imagine the kind of worldview shift of speaking without nouns, but only using verbs and only things that are in becoming. It's just mind-blowing if you think about it. So anyhow, this is another thing in which kind of can point to the fixation that we have. How do I even speak without nouns? But what becomes possible when you focus more on the act of something becoming something else versus an object, and describing an object alone and listing it, their properties or their qualities or their, I don't know. So this is just one of the other things that I've been musing about.
That is just beautiful. I mean, that's such a wonderful metaphor that you've shared with us, that, imagine a world where nothing is seen as static, right? That it's just in the process of becoming. And it's, yes, absolutely, very much a philosophy I'm currently exploring as well. I'm a huge fan of a lady called Donna Haraway. She wrote this book called Staying with the Trouble. And she says that the problem is people don't want to stay with the trouble. They want to solve the problem and be done with it. But that is in and of itself the problem. And that we need to learn to stay with it. Understand that we co-evolve, we co-regulate, rather than, just I evolved and I regulated, is to recognize that we evolve and regulate in response to our environment and the relationships that we're embedded within. So that's just so beautiful. Thank you for that. I am amazed by how quickly time has gone. So what I'm going to do is just do we like to do this on the Salience podcast, where we talk about, 3 sort of summary points that try to consolidate. I don't think I can do that, but the richness of this conversation, and I'm going to attempt to do so. So one of the things that I've taken away is the importance of, framing things in healthy tension, not to polarize, but to recognize that they are polarities, right? And it's really important for us as well to understand and be able to sense when, things are swinging in the other direction, right? How do we actually, help people to understand that it's not a one and done thing. You are always in a process of becoming. So that for me was the second thing. We are constantly becoming. Imagine a world that is full of verbs, full of sort of just describing what a thing does and how it acts in relation to others, as opposed to it being a thing in and of itself. And one of the earlier takeaways from this conversation is how we can help people to do that by helping them to still recognize where their agency sits, right? Even within such a big realm of uncertainty, and how you mentioned that we can help them to identify what variables they actually have within their influence. It's been just such an amazing and rich conversation. I have another question for you, because you've already lived such a rich multiple lives, right? Journalism, social science, sustainability, leadership, coaching. What's next for you? What is where your attention, where your passion goes now?
I don't know, which is part of the wayfinding kind of experiment, going in the direction of your curiosity. I don't exactly know, but I have some inklings about where my curiosity is at today. So the thing that we mentioned earlier about how does a group come together to common meaning making, and how does individual meaning making influence or change or causally kind of changes a group's meaning making. So in lack of a better word, people talk a lot about collective intelligence, which I think is fine to talk about, but specifically have an interest about how does the individual meaning making relate to the collective meaning making, because this is something that I've noticed as a facilitator, like groups come together with some facilitated processes and structures, and they have to make sense. Well, they have to make sense of the world, see some data about the world around them, make some meaning of it, make some hypotheses and interpretations, and decide what to do about it. And that sounds really simple on paper, but there is a lot that we don't know in terms of cognitive science, in terms of anthropology, in terms of how social cognition works. And the reason why I'm so interested in this is because, our clients ask us, we're overwhelmed by the complexity of the world around there. With an executive team, we take stock of the trends in the world. We need to chart our own path forward. And we want to be effective as decision makers, not just as an individual, but as a team, because we're an executive team. We have to make sense of the world, act in it, and hopefully do the right thing. We don't know. We will not know until, some time down the line. And I'm curious about how the individual meaning making influences and relates to the collective meaning making. And the reason I'm curious about it is because people have to make meaning of complex, uncertain data in the face of a future that is, has some promises and beautiful things that can happen, but also some risks, sustainability, climate change, some threats to democracy. How do we make meaning of the world around us? And how do we collectively take stock of it and make some decisions forward that are good, not only for the individual, not only for the team or for the company they work with, but also for the futures? How do they take into account different levels of nested kind of systems and embedded systems and complex and the complexity of those different dimensions? So that's something that I'm curious about as a facilitator. But also, I think that would be probably a juicy kind of intersection between theory and practice and what we're learning from these interventions that we make as practitioners at the same time. So that's a question that I can easily spend the next 100 years on, because I don't think that it will ever be a solution. So going back to our conversation earlier, but maybe we can find something with practice that works well enough in the moment, and we can be practitioners of it for a while.
That is just such a wonderful way for us to have, come to the end of what is it, less than an hour, but it went by so quickly.
You see, I want to get invited again. That's why I'm giving you these big topics.
Absolutely. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the link to Marco's blog in the link in our podcast description, because all of those topics, as you explore and as you research them, you're going to be writing about them. I look forward to reading about them, and I'm going to be also adding that blog link so everyone can read about it as well.
Thank you so much, Jen. This has been an absolute pleasure. Let's keep some of these questions present in our awareness.
Absolutely. I hope to speak again after you've had a bit of time to explore some of those big questions.
All right. Thanks again.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Salience podcast. Please leave us a review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to the Frontline Mind newsletter by visiting our website at frontlinemind.com. Have you got a topic you would like some more salience on? Send us a message on LinkedIn or email team@frontlinemind.com.